Good evening and welcome to Bugajski Hour. It is exciting to be back in Tirana to examine important global and local developments that affect the lives of all Albanians. I will be discussing some pivotal questions with a major national personality and reviewing some important topics with our studio audience. And our guest today on the Bugajski hot seat is the Mayor of Tirana and the new leader of the Democratic Party, Basha. But first, I will give you my American perspective on the world. My topic today is entitled Losing Ukraine. Moscow is declaring victory over the EU in its battle over Ukraine, the largest and most populous East European country. Ukraine's government has withdrawn from an association agreement with the European Union, a decision that will pull Kiev more firmly into Russia's orbit. European Commission President Jose Manuel Barroso condemned Russian pressure tactics on Ukraine, while US Secretary of State John Kerry cancelled his visit to Kiev. But no retaliatory action has been taken against Moscow. Ukraine's reversal is the result of EU conditions and Russia's blackmail. Brussels insists that Kiev carry out reforms in the judicial and electoral systems and free all of its political opponents. President Viktor Yanukovych has resisted releasing his main political rival, Yulia Tymoshenko, as she could stymie his election prospects in 2015. In addition, Ukraine's EU association agreement carries no promise of membership, unlike in the Western Balkans. In stark contrast, Russia wants to bind Ukraine and other neighbors in a rival Eurasia Union. President Vladimir Putin threatened to retaliate if Kyiv signed the EU deal, resulting in trade losses worth billions of dollars. Yanukovych was also offered a reduction in natural gas prices, as well as help to meet repayments on Ukraine's massive national debt. But such short-term gains do not outweigh the long-term costs. Rejection of the association agreement will limit future EU financial support, as well as Western business, which will be hesitant to invest in a country with an uncertain future. The cancelled EU agreement leaves the country vulnerable to Moscow's imperial designs. Putin is pushing Yanukovych to join the Russian-centered customs union. This is the first step towards Eurasia Union membership. However, in trying to recreate its empire, Russia will face a huge burden in reviving the Ukrainian economy, at a time when its own economy is stagnating. Moscow also confronts a growing Ukrainian revolt, as we've seen in the streets of Kyiv, especially if the economy slides into recession. The next Ukrainian upheaval may not repeat the peaceful Orange Revolution almost a decade ago. The potential for radicalism and even violent confrontation is rising. Moscow's pressure tactics may lead to a Ukrainian implosion that could fracture the country and impact on the stability of Russia itself. It is time for the Bugajski hot seat, and our guest today is Basha, the mayor of Tirana and the new leader of the opposition in Albania. Welcome to the show, Lulzim.
Thank you, Janos. Good to be back here, on your hot seat.
On my hot seat? Well, you're supposed to be on the hot seat, not me. Let me start, I mean, I have many questions, but let me start, obviously, with the performance of the new government. The honeymoon ended very quickly, as it tends to, I think, in this region. And we have already witnessed a number of quite heated disputes between government and opposition. Let me start with the economy, because I think that's the core of everything that is important to Albanian citizens. The the new Prime Minister stated that the country faces economic problems with a large public debt because of the policies of the previous government, of the Democratic Party government. How would you respond to that assertion? I mean, is the country in financial crisis, as far as you can see?
The country is experiencing a degradation in its economic outlook, and this has happened over the past 3 months. The testimony for this is not coming from the opposition. It's coming from reliable international sources, such as, most recently, Standard & Poor's, which downgraded Albania from B+ to B, from stable to negative. This is the first time that Albania is downgraded to this level since 2007. And that B+ rating came as a result of very well measured fiscal policies, fiscal self-discipline, paired with a very good foresight as far as public investments are concerned, and injecting not simply capital but optimism in the Albanian economy, which the World Bank said just this week again, their representative in Tirana, was the only economy in the region which kept immune from the world recession. In fact, it continued to grow over the past few years. This is the World Bank saying this, the same advisor who is now advising the government of Mr. Rama. So the worrying thing about this part of the rhetoric of Mr. Rama is that 100 days almost into his mandate as Prime Minister, he continues to adopt the language of the leader of the opposition, blaming the past and not focusing on the present, not at all focusing on the future. This is very worrying. It's worrying because the state of economy in Albania, and with it jobs and welfare of so many Albanians, depends on many factors, but one of the most important factors is the mobilization of the majority of the government to continue policies and programs and actions that stimulate positive growth, that stimulate optimism, that open up Albania furthermore to both domestic and international investments. The contrary seems to happen. A climate of panic is being induced in the country as a result of repressive and anti-legal measures that are harming both the stability and the stability outlook, such as Standard & Poor's prediction, but also that are harming instruments of government to influence economic outlook. The most blatant attack against Albanian economy was a normative act by which the budget of 2013 was changed. And we warned the government back then. We said this is an alarm bell. This is an alarm bell. This is pushing Albania in the direction of recession. It has not experienced recession. It has experienced a decline in economic growth. Economic growth is not what it used to be.
How exactly was the budget changed? Maybe
it was changed. It was changed by multiplying the debt. In 2013, in 2012, our government planned a budget which was under execution for the first 8 months of this year, while this government was still in power. And imagine, for the first 8 months of this year, our government, heading for elections, losing its coalition partner, having elections, losing elections, still managed to perform in terms of collection of revenue only 4.3% less than the plan, which means every month, on average, that government collected $15 million less than the plan. Underperforming clearly with the plan, but at a measure of $15 million less. On a footnote, the government managed well the debt. As a result of better service of the debt of Albania, it saved $50 million, and it saved another $10 million from lowering expenses. So it delivered to Rama government an annual deficit of $120 million, but it also gave over a saving of $60 million, thus squaring at a $60 million hole. The hole in the budget of the Republic of Albania, when we handed over power to the socialist government, was $60 million. On coming to power, the strangest thing happened. Instead of, true to their promises, trying to collect more revenue, they not only didn't do that, not only didn't even pledge to collect what we had planned, not only did not underperform at the level we underperformed, so $15 million a month, but decreed an act of government with the power of law, a normative act, by which they pledged to the Albanian public that the new government was going to underperform 4 times worse than the previous government. And this is absurd. This is telling the public, yes, we are a new government, but you know what? On one of our core duties, which is collection of revenue, we're going to do worse than the previous government. And here we're going to pass this by our votes in parliament. And compare with that, they stipulated borrowing at an amount of $400 million. It is this policy, which is now law, budget law, as a result of their action, that exactly as we had said, worsened the economic outlook in the eyes of experts such as Standard & Poor and other reputational agencies. We warned them not to do this. They did it. They did it for political reasons. There was no reason to do this. In fact, performance of the fiscal sector in the first month, although lower than performance of our administration before, showed that there was no reason for such panic. But panic was created, and this has been now changed, or has impacted the rating of Albania, which means that every dollar and euro that now Albania, the Albanian government, borrows is more expensive than a week or 2 weeks ago. And of course, these are money that ultimately are coming out of the pockets of Albanian taxpayers.
So you're saying more revenue should be collected here in Albania?
I'm saying that the government has launched not only that lacks an economic plan, lacks a plan to affront the challenges that we know Albania faces, lacks the self-discipline. We see on one side borrowing at huge amounts, on the other side we see that part of the borrowing is for operational expenses. We see the government spending to decorate its new offices, to create new office space, to buy more operational equipment for the government. Now we are not against a government running smoothly, but we are against expenditure that can be saved Albanian taxpayers, especially in times of economic hardships such are those that are.
So you're recommending what? Streamlining in government spending, greater revenue
We told
collection.
the government, first of all, that the normative act was a sign of panic and a sign of incompetence. We urged them not to do it. We urged them to continue down the same planning that we had and to improve, as everybody expects from a new government, collection of revenue and to have a better expenditure plan. All of this fell into deaf ears. Government of Mr. Rama had decided, and unilaterally, without engaging us in a debate, although in this debate we as an opposition engaged all interested factors, including business, including other interest groups, and everybody was against it, they went ahead and they did what is now paying off in such a way. And the result of this is a worsening of the deficit. Albania has now a higher deficit. As a result of a higher deficit and a higher deficit projection, it has been downgraded from Standard & Poor, and this will have deeper repercussions as we are heading towards the next fiscal year. The other thing is that it lacks an economic plan. It has promised 300,000 new jobs. We haven't seen one step in this direction.
Are investors now shunning
They
Albania?
are shocked. Today, according to Albanian laws, we should have voted on the budget on November 30. As we speak, the government still hasn't unveiled its budget plan. As we speak, we don't know what's going to happen to the taxes. We read in media leaks that show that all of the taxes are going to jump up, which is another break of promises, because they promised in the campaign 98% of the Albanians will pay less. But what is even worse, because we don't believe that if Rama forsakes this promise, this is going to be bad for Albania. On this matter, we are a very principled opposition. We rather see him backing off from his populist promises of the campaign than see him keeping promises that will harm the economy. But we don't know anything. We don't know how much the changes are going to impact the fiscal package. We don't know what changes they're going to be implemented for the VAT, for the corporate tax, for the income tax. Are they going to stick with the flat tax? Are they going to introduce progressive tax? And this uncertainty in itself hurts businesses, hurts the confidence of small, medium business owners in Albania, hurts the confidence of domestic corporations, boos away foreign investors, hurts consumption. Bank of Albania figures show consumption on continuous decline over the past 90 days.
So do you think there'll be a bigger burden on the middle classes then, in terms of taxation?
If I may just conclude on this, this is a self-induced scenario of the worsening of economic outlook. Nobody has said that the situation was perfect. The challenges were clear to us, but we had managed, even in the peak of the effects of the crisis in 2012, to keep economic growth afloat, not to experience not even 1 month of recession. Now, all of a sudden, as a result of these measures, we see the economy heading speedily towards an unknown direction. We see figures dropping, we see confidence dropping in the economy. And this one aspect of the uncertainty that has come as a result of the lack of any plan by the government, the lack of transparency with the measures it has chosen to introduce, and the complete lack of transparency and accountability as far as the perspective, in this case, the budget of 2014, which remains a mystery to this very moment, illegally so.
Going back to my question on the middle classes, can Albanians expect to be taxed more, particularly the small entrepreneurs, professionals?
This is what we hear. The government seems to be preparing a package that will see taxation rise. And we are vehemently against it. Not from a populist corner. It will be very easy for the opposition to turn to the public and say, hey, there's more money coming out of your pockets. And there will be more money that will be coming out of the Albanian pockets instead of going into the Albanians' pockets. What we are worried about is that this move comes as part of no plan, no vision, no program. To the contrary, it will hurt one of the few assets that a small country like Albania had in positioning itself in world competition. Flat tax was one of the advantages that investors, especially international investors, identified in considering or deciding to operate investments in Albania.
Some would also argue that this isn't simply the fault of any particular Albanian government. In other words, your decline in economic growth, that this is a sort of long-term impact of the Europe-wide financial crisis, recession, and so forth. What's your response to that?
There is no question that the global situation and the European situation and our neighbors' situation has had a negative impact on our economy. I told you just a few minutes ago that growth dropped from 6 to 7% in 2005, 2009 to between 2 and 4% in 2009, 2013. But it was still growth. And it was more, as the World Bank said this week, more than what the other countries in the region could show for. This was not a gift from heaven. This was not just happening. This was the result of clear policy and clear vision, which rested on low taxation, small burden on the government side, so small government expenditure, robust investments, public investments, and a policy of continuous but careful and well-planned augmentation, growth of salaries and pensions in the public sector without hurting the competition in the private sector. This careful policy, paired with extremely diligent treatment of the debt and debt service issue, brought the country where we were standing. But we were walking on an edge. The country was on an edge and is on an edge. The government can do two things. Can help to focus the country to continue to walk that straight line in a positive way, or it can push the country off the cliff.
Could Albania become another Greece?
I definitely hope not. But
is there a possibility?
Of course there is a possibility. In this situation, anything can happen. And it is the responsibility of the government to wake up and forsake populist, opposition-like TV shows and propaganda and focus on very important, delicate and urgent matters of economy that impact every Albanian, regardless whether it's a voter of the opposition or a voter of the government. This is urgent. This is delicate. This is happening. There is no time, there is no margin for populism and for politics in the worst narrow sense of the word. This is the time to take joint action, and the Democratic Party has a plan, has a platform, has an alternative. We were ready to share this with the government when they reviewed the budget. They were not willing to do this, so we shared it with the public. Again, we have a platform. We have our alternative. We're going to share it this week with interest groups, with business groups, with the trade unions, our view on how this situation must be handled. the government is welcome to engage in this. This is and must rise above the daily political bickering. We're talking about very high stakes. We're talking about economic stability. If measures are not taken, recession,
social stability as well.
Recession could set in with devastating consequences for thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs, which means the welfare of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Albanian families, which means, as you said, social instability.
What is the role of the IMF here? Where do things stand with the International Monetary Fund in terms of loans and the conditions that come with it?
Well, that's a good question. 5 months ago, if you had asked me what do you think IMF should do, I would have said nothing. We don't want them here. We're handling this. We're doing well. We want a growth-focused plan, of course, with the safeguards of fiscal self-discipline and financial self-discipline. And well, this is what I would have told you 5, 6, 7, 8 months ago.
Yeah.
Today I tell you there is not, in the view of the arbitrarity, unpredictability, and dangerous nature of measures that this government is taking in an unconsulted fashion, I tell you the best thing that could happen to the country is an IMF program. Because
one that imposes certain conditions, including austerity measures.
The irresponsibility with which the government is handling the matter is frightening. And it is our duty as politicians, as public servants, to foresee things and to heed things and not to react after things have happened. And in this course of events, the country is speedily heading to an abyss, which will be reflected in the welfare and job situation of every Albanian. We have called on the government, we are continuing to call on the government not to be so irresponsible with this crucial matter. We're not being listened to. So in these conditions, I think the best thing that could happen to the country is a partnership with the IMF. At least we hope that they will be able to impose upon the government some measure of responsibility and self-restraint, if not a program and a vision, which the government doesn't have and which the country cannot hope to have coming from the IMF. Right. It's something that must be homegrown and must take in account the interests of the Albanians.
So you are supportive of an IMF role here?
I am definitely, and the Democratic Party is definitely supportive of IMF presence in Albania as the only way to ensure that the country is not spiraling out of control. And I say this with a big degree of regret, because I believe that the government, if it had chosen to act responsibly, if it had forsaken pre-election rhetoric, it could have not only prevented things from rolling down the hill as they have so far, but it could even have profited from the positive momentum that every new government receives after it comes to office, to offer a new impulse, a positive impulse into the economy. And it's not coming.
What specifically, I mean, to follow up to this, what specifically needs to be done to generate investment, foreign investment, jobs, you know, the sort of promises that were made during the election campaign?
Well, this is a good question for the Prime Minister, because he hasn't answered that question yet. We answered that question for 8 years, and for 8 years we saw the direct foreign investment portfolio in Albania grow year to year, despite the crisis. And a lot of this was translated in new jobs for Albanians, in new industries being opened, in a very difficult time. I remind you, a very difficult time for the entire region. So now what is needed is a government that has, first of all, the foresight, the vision on how it wants to approach the extremely delicate issue of economic growth and economic stability, that it has the will to take action where action is needed, and that it has the responsibility to be self-restrained in those areas that need self-restraint from the government. In fact, the contrary messages are being sent. Businesses are being targeted arbitrarily. The state is acting as a pirate, as a bandit, within its own structures. Just last week, we saw people, unknown people, destroying the online system of Albanian taxation. And as a result, thousands upon thousands of Albanians had to queue because they could not file anymore their data online. It's a criminal act. More than 4.3 million self-statements of the businesses have disappeared from the system. Thousands of businesses have been unable to file their application on a timely fashion, opening the door to more arbitrarity from the side of tax inspectors and to unequal treatment, which is, of course, one of the reasons for informality. So, with its actions, with its arbitrarity, with its lack of clarity, with its lack of plan, the government is inducing fear, insecurity. It's inducing in a country that has been able in the past 8 years to bring more formality to the sector, precisely as a result of clearer and shorter procedures and the use of information technology, it's inducing more informality. And this is a deadly combination: arbitrarity, insecurity, informality.
We will break now for a few adverts. One important component of, obviously, of business and investment is transparency. How would you react, I mean, in terms of the whole corruption campaign, if a former Democratic Party minister is arrested on corruption charges? I believe the prosecution office has received a lawsuit against your former defense minister, Mr. Imami. How would you react to this?
It's a good thing you phrased it properly. You said a corruption campaign. I don't believe corruption can be fought through campaigns, and this is exactly what we're facing. We're facing a show. There is no plan. There is no program. There is a show which is made to impress, but not to achieve what is elementary for Albania's further progress, also as far as European Union is concerned, which is real fight against corruption. Why do I say this? What the government needs to demonstrate in the fight against corruption is political will. Political will to fight corruption is very important, it's pivotal. And of course there are different phases in the fight against corruption where in the justice side, justice has to do its work, okay? But what do we see from this government in the first months in office? The most blatant and condemnable form of corruption is political corruption. This government came to office through elections organized by our government, which we lost, which were considered free and fair by audience, regardless of many allegations of deformation of the vote, not by the government, ironically, but accusations were pointing on the side of the opposition. Transition took place in a peaceful way, rotation took place in a peaceful way. This government had the chance to prove its credentials on the free vote, for which it has cried so loudly when it was in opposition once in Korcha. And what happened? Albanians saw and heard vote buying, not at the corner of the street, but raised at a clinical level, clinical professional level in Korcha. Political corruption is the highest form of corruption. Not only has this government damaged, tarnished its reputation as far as its ability to organize free and fair elections, not only has the country received a dent in a fundamental column, existential column of its existence as a free democratic country with the rule of law by vote buying, because vote buying is basically executing democracy. But it has also been exposed to the most brutal and highest, according to all anti-corruption organizations in the world, highest form of corruption, which is political corruption. And we see political corruption not simply in vote buying in Korcha. We see it in appointments which are not only illegal at the highest levels, customs, fiscal services, police, but also in Albanians' properties, where people that are clearly linked with special interests within Mr. Rama's parliamentary group are appointing their henchmen, their assistants to head boards and enterprises that control Albanians and public property, such as the case with Alpetrol. And this is going on day after day. We were promised a depoliticized education system by Mr. Rama. And to this end, he started this competitions process, so-called competitions, to elect people who are going to head the regional education boards. Every single competition degenerated. into the election of a #1 or #2 of the Socialist Party in the localities, culminating in Tirana, where the Prime Minister himself sat for 4 hours in an attempt to grant legitimacy to the process, and where all Albanians saw that the lady that was elected was the one that figured prominently in the Socialist Party electoral spot in the elections of June 23. In the Albanian police, departing with a tradition that had been consolidated for the past 8 years, there have been appointments at the very top of people that do not possess the legal requirements for the duty they're having, starting with the Director General of the police, but who are clearly linked to Socialist Party activity throughout this period, and in particular in the last elections, where documents of the CEC show clearly that these people were performing functions that are only entrusted to the most trusted people within the party. And sometimes they were even candidates, official candidates to run for the SP, such as the case with the Director of Personnel in the Albanian police. Yeah. So this is not a way to demonstrate the will to fight corruption.
And I understand what you're saying.
Now, this is one side,
right.
But what they have done,
right.
They have targeted in a discriminatory way particular issues that point to a witch hunt, which is not a will to fight corruption. If the Prime Minister, I've said from the very beginning, the majority is begged, and we as an opposition are ready to scrutinize every allegation that they have made when they were in opposition.
So no former minister is immune, basically?
Of course not. Nobody is. And we have proven this. But what has happened? We hear the Ministry of Defense, the Minister of Defense coming out and saying there is abuse of office, abuse of power, and infringing upon the principle of equality in tenders in the Ministry of Defense. And for this, we are sending to the prosecutor a file that has been composed by experts on the minister and 5 of his, or 6 of his collaborators. Now, who is this group of experts? What are the charges? How did they come to this conclusion? Was this a legally authorized process, or was this a political order? These were the questions that people were asking, not us, in the first hours when this absurd press conference was held, with no other information but the fact that some experts had worked together on a file connecting the minister to tenders, when everybody knows that ministers have no authority on tenders, but that's a different matter. That's for the investigation and for justice to look at. And then, a few hours later, the Prime Minister goes up on Facebook. One sentence. The former Minister of Defense must be punished for corruption. Full stop. A fatwa is issued. The Grand Ayatollah has spoken. Rule of law, out of the window. Constitution, trias politica, separation of powers. The Prime Minister, the Ayatollah has spoken. He is Prime Minister, he is Prosecutor General, he is Supreme Judge. And he has chosen that a man who, by the way, has been the subject of systematic personal and political attacks by Mr. Rama himself. The two are not unknown to each other, also in their past. They both have been professors of arts at the Art Academy, been teaching arts. Professor is a big word, but both have been teaching arts at the Art Academy. All of a sudden we see this, and this is extremely worrying. This is not a European geopolitical reality. This is not what Albania is or should be about.
Well, let me jump in. Paradoxically, is this not done partially to show the European Union that Albania is meeting the conditions for rooting out corruption?
This is the worst demonstration that you can give about the will to fight corruption. If on one side you're launching vote buying, you're putting your closest associates, economic associates, in charge of Albania's public properties, if you're violating the law and employing militants in the Albanian police, in the Albanian customs, in the Albanian tax services, this is political corruption, is the highest form of corruption. And if on the other side, just for the sake of the show, you're going after well-known political opponents, and even if you are starting a case of which you give absolutely no transparency, you go out on a social network and come out not with a will to fight corruption wherever it is, but with a sentence in the judicial sense. If you have sentenced your political opponent, this is witch hunt, and I don't think European Union or any other country is waiting to see this from Albania, because what this is not fight against corruption. This is a show. And let me end by this. The fight against corruption needs will, strong political will. which this government lacks because it has proven the contrary. It needs proper infrastructure, which at large exists, and it needs implementation. Now, they have come to Parliament forward with proposals to change the Code of Criminal Procedure and the anti-mafia law, which we put in place, proposing that corruption is treated the same way as terrorism, which we tried when we were in the majority too. But we learned from our mistakes. We learned that you cannot have in one court, the Court of Serious Crimes in Tirana, you cannot have all the indictments for corruption throughout the country coming there, because instead of helping the fight against corruption, it's going to complicate the fight against corruption on one side. And secondly, you cannot fight corruption with shows. You have to fight corruption with organized, functioning instruments that implement the law. And OBDAT from the United States Embassy and OSCE came out and said, gentlemen, what you have proposed is political, is not legal. You are demonstrating a will, but what you are proposing is not going to strengthen the fight against corruption. It's going to weaken the fight against corruption. And those documents are public. The media has displayed them. Everybody knows them. Our members of parliament have made this clear in the parliamentary commissions. So far, we have seen zero reflection from the majority, which again goes to the point that I made earlier, on which you called me. There seems to be a clear drive. The only will that the government has is to engage in a show as if it is fighting corruption, is to elect or to select witch hunt as the instrument to do this, but on every other aspect it is so far miserably failing in the fight against corruption, which I believe, and the Democratic Party believes, is pivotal to our further progress. And that's why we are determined to do everything it takes for a real fight against corruption.
Given what you've said so far, the future looks quite grim. The economy's face is on the verge of an abyss. Potential for social instability because of austerity measures and lack of investment, lack of job creation. And at the same time, a much more heated political atmosphere in which, as you're saying, the government is engaging in witch hunts against the opposition, deflecting attention, if you like, from the economy. I mean, is that an accurate portrayal?
That's a very accurate portrait, and we have said so, that the inability, the lack of any plan to fulfill its promises, the lack of any plan or will to tackle the real problems of Albania, which is economy, its welfare, its jobs, is bringing this government day to day now in collusion with democracy and the rule of law. Every single time that they come out with a bombastic show, they have done so by violating legal principles, guarantees and freedoms of the Constitution that are protected in this country on behalf of the citizens that they affect. Let's take, for instance, the so-called, the famous action against the casino, illegal casinos. 6,000 police officers, effectively the whole operational force of Albanian police, were put to close down illegal casinos for more than 2 weeks. How many prosecutions? How much informal income for the state? What is the impact? Most of the casinos are still open, are open again. What is the impact? What has the public gained from this?
Yeah.
Nothing. Arbitrarity, yes. The government has adopted a measure which I think would have made even the sheriff of Nottingham blush, whereby it has given the Central Construction Inspection Unit the power to raise the house of any Albanian without warning, even if it is built properly, if the owner can show a proper legal permit, if the sheriff of Nottingham or the chief inspector judges that that permit was issued in contravening the law, thus vesting the power that in this country by constitution is given to the courts on an issue that in this country by constitution is dealt only by local government, regarding the sanctity of property that is protected in the very first articles of the Albanian constitution, contrary to the well-protected principle of legal certainty and predictability and due process that are also constitutional processes, in the hands of one arbitrary person. I bring this example, but there are several examples like this that show that there is not only insecurity in the economic sense, there is not only irresponsibility in issues such as the fight against corruption, where there is no will to fight, but only a will to show, to case show and to have a propaganda show. But there is a degradation of the rule of law in Albania that started when they cancelled unilaterally, illegally and anti-constitutionally the law on civil servant, which was approved by consensus and overnight cancelled, not by the parliament, but by the Council of Ministers. That was the opening salvo, and we warned so. If the government could so easily brush aside consensus between the main parties, and do so not through another parliament act, but through a government act, behind closed doors, 4 hours before it entered into force, beyond the very law that it affected, beyond the guarantees that that law gave to the civil administration, which is now being persecuted. As we speak, we have more than 2,000 cases of illegal firing, dismissal in the system. But it showed that this government does not consider the opposition a partner in the democratic reality of Albania, an opponent in the political sense, but it considers it an enemy to be dealt with in such a way that all decisions can be taken without taking into account the functioning of parliament, the functioning of opposition, the functioning of democracy. It has destroyed the trust. It has destroyed the possibility for dialogue. You know, trust is very difficult to achieve in Albania, in most democracies, even in some advanced democracies. Trust comes by foot, but leaves by horse. And this is exactly what has happened. And after this, it has launched attack after attack after attack against the constitution, against the rule of law. So yes, we are worried because we're looking at a degradation of the rule of law, a degradation of public order and security. If you replace professionals with militants, if you start using police, abusing police in issues outside of its legal mandate, or even worse, ordering it for illegal operations, then you undo the credibility and the legitimacy of the police, first and foremost within the police themselves, and then between police and the larger public. And the effects are clear. A deterioration in the situation of the rule of law, and a deterioration, in the public order and security, and a deterioration in the rule of law. Existential columns have been hit, and it's not yet 100 days. This is extremely worrying. Having said that, to come back to your first question, we have, as an opposition, done everything and continue to do everything for status, for Albania to receive the status. Now, this may sound paradoxical.
The candidacy status with the European Union.
And some may even say this is hypocritical, but I tell you why not, and why we have done everything possible. It is now the second year that the Commission recommends status. The first time around, there was this three laws condition, which was fulfilled. And since then, Albania has held elections. There's been a peaceful rotation. And status is not membership. It's not even the opening of negotiations. So that period has been reviewed. Twice there has been a judgment of a reliable body, which is the European Commission. And there is no reason, in our view, that the Council, member states, should delay the status. These problems have, in between, surfaced. And they are serious problems. And I know that our allies and friends and partners in NATO, most of them are also members of the European Union, know and follow these things. But I have told, and we have told them as loudly as we could, that not granting Albanian status is not going to happen, is not going to help any of these issues. To the contrary, deflecting attention from Albania, denying Albanian status, is going to help the cause of irresponsibility, arbitrarity, and arrogance of the government. Well, granting status, on the other side, will not cost the European Union more money. They will not be parting with rights, for instance, free movement. We already have free movement. But they will be sending a strong signal that Albania's place is in Europe. And that signal will mean that conduct of the government, as well as of the opposition, as well as of all other forces in the society, must live up to that new heightened standard of European Union. A heightened standard is what we expect the status will impose upon this government and upon the society as a whole. Well, let me Whereas denying it will basically say, okay, guys, you've gone back to your old tricks.
Let me ask you,
you are
bluntly,
undoing what you have achieved so far.
What impact would it have? Denial of candidacy status or postponement of candidacy status in 2 weeks' time during the decision of the European Council. What impact will it have on Albania in terms of political relations? Will it deepen political polarization in the country? Will it increase social disquiet? Will there be a nationalist backlash maybe in Albania?
it's unable to predict what sectorial reactions will be. But I tell you that in terms of the overall impact, it will be the same impact as the Standard & Poor rating for the economy, but 10 times more powerful in a negative sense, and blanketed all over the sectors of society. So it will be a very negative signal to the society as a whole. Definitely, first and foremost, it will be a signal to the government. But you know what? In everything that the government does, in everything that this Prime Minister says, it seems he doesn't care. So from this point of view, it's not going to impress upon him or his followers in the government what it might have impressed under other conditions. From this point of view, we have to understand we're dealing with a very specific reality. I'll be very blunt. With the highest level of irresponsibility that may have been witnessed even from a Balkan leader recently, which was very clear also in the way he handled the chemical weapons issue.
I'll come to that in a minute.
So from this point of view, it is very important that signals are sent, granting the status because the country achieved what it achieved, just like the Commission said in its second report, but on the way ahead, making clear that from a country that enjoys status because of how far it came until October, when the recommendation came, much more is expected to go the other steps, rather than saying no status and you're on your own.
In addition to the internal political and social problems it could generate, denial of status, how will it affect relations with neighbors who have already achieved that status? I'm thinking of countries like Serbia, Montenegro, Macedonia.
Well, you know, it's a merit-based process. It's what the Commission and the Union has said through its many institutions. But it has been my point of view that status decision for Albania is overdue. That whatever was achieved in Macedonia or in Serbia or in Montenegro when they got status, the status, was not at all different from a positive point of view from what Albania had achieved a year ago or 2 years ago or even 3 years ago. But this is not something that we can control. This is a decision that belongs, it's extraneous to us. What they have to look at is the danger of perception of double standards, or even worse, the reality of double standards, and the many Pandora's boxes that this opens in a rumor-intensive, drama-prone reality like the conspiracy-based, in a drama-prone political reality such as the Western Balkans.
Let me go on to another. I know we'll come back to this question many times, but let's go to another issue which has passed in some ways, but I think it may have some repercussions. What is your view on the government decision, the way it was handled, the question of the Syrian chemical agents that our government asked for Albania to dispose of? You criticize, let me ask you specifically, you criticize the government for lack of transparency, but it seems to me that the entire process from both sides, the American side and the Albanian side, seemed to lack clarity and explanation to the Albanian public on exactly what was required of Albania. In other words, that there were many people at fault here, many sides at fault. Well, how do you view it? What is your response?
You know, the responsibility in Albania rests with the Albanian government. Okay, decisions in this country are taken by its government, by its elected officials. So from this point of view, there is no dilemma. And in retrospect, it fits with a pattern of lack of transparency and responsibility that we see in all other actions of the government since it took office. They have taken power, but they have refused to take responsibility. Lack of transparency, lack of accountability, lack of responsibility were the components that brewed the chemical weapons crisis in Albania. The public reacted, and this is a piece of good news.
I was just coming to that.
The public reacted against being ignored.
Civil society in action.
The civil society refused being ignored from its elected officials. So within the same month, if I may say so, we had a very hopeless, sad, dangerous event such as vote buying, especially affecting in that incident that was filmed, and there were many others elsewhere, the youth, corruption of the soul of the youth as far as political activism is concerned. Telling them, you know, it doesn't matter what you think, come and get those $20 and your vote is worth $20. And then on the other side, 3 weeks later, we have the most hopeful, massive, strong demonstration of the unbendable soul of freedom in an open society, which is youth taking to the streets without scenario, without banners, without expensive commercials.
Non-partisan.
Non-partisan. And defeating with no's written on their palms and in their cheeks. Arbitrarity and arrogance, lack of transparency and irresponsibility of the government. It was a reaction towards not being heard. And it made clear that this society has now reached a degree of maturity that it cannot tolerate not being heard, not being asked about matters that fundamentally affect the lives of every Albanian. This is extremely hopeful, and I have to tell you why. As an opposition, I told you what we've been facing for this first 3 months. Arbitrarity, hypocrisy, lack of dialogue, violation of consensus, and then fundamental columns of democracy, such as the free vote and the rule of law, receiving hits, in the case of rule of law, daily, if not weekly blows. And if this is paired with indifferentism, this is for sure a death toll for democracy as we know this. But here you have this impulse of people actually saying, if we can, you know, if you can look at the bigger context than the reason for which they came on the street, which was chemical weapons, but the real reason was for them not being heard, then you see that there is a new fiber being developed. These were mostly young people. And this is a second, in a way, there can be, it would be cheap to draw an analogy between December 1990 and this, but what I could most closely come up with is that you have a new fiber of a new generation that has been born in free Albania, which is unwilling to accept arbitrarity, which is unwilling to accept democracy as a concept that is actualized only once in 4 years. No, democracy is a daily reality. A responsibility of the government towards citizens is a daily reality. Transparency, daily obligation. Transparency is a daily obligation of government. And this regards the fundamental, the core value of European identity, which is individual dignity. These people were there for their dignity, and dignity can only be assured if democracy is not acting once in 4 years, but it's acting every day. And this is what we have come out from this with an inspiration for a new type of democracy, for a new democracy. A democracy where individual dignity is central, a democracy where responsibility of the government to those who are governed, of the elected to those who elect them, is a daily issue, not once in 4 years. And this is what the Democratic Party is proposing as its approach, as its vision, especially in these times when we are kicking off the party elections throughout the country.
Well, actually, you put me nicely, a segue straight into the Democratic Party, the future of the party and the state of the party. You are now the official leader, but what is your relationship with the former leader, Sali Berisha? What role does he play in the party now? I mean, you're formally the new leader of the party. Do you control the party? Is it factionalized? Does it still need to be brought together? What is the state of the party?
We have come out of an election defeat, and I am the leader of the party in opposition. So my primary task is to, first of all, lead the effort for a strong and frontal opposition, but also one that is based on facts, argument, and reason. My other important task is to lead the effort to reorganization, regeneration, unification of all historical contributions of a party that has by now 23 years in Albania's history, and which has given its contribution both in opposition and in government to the most transformational period that the nation has known in modern history. So I do not come to this party without It's not tabula rasa. The party has a history. And in this history of the party, there are the contributions of the founders, of those that resisted the 1997 to 2005 harsh opposition, of those that gave so much in the 2005-2013 drive of the country forward with undeniable achievements such as NATO, visa liberalization, overhauling of the infrastructure, economic stability and progress, but which also needs to reflect on the reason why Albanians on June 23 voted for this party and for our coalition to go into opposition. So for a time of reflection, analysis,
You're doing the assessment
and
now?
renewal.
Yeah.
So this is part of my task, leading an effort which cannot be only my effort, is the effort of a party as a whole. And in this process, I'm trying to utilize all the assets that the Democratic Party has at its disposal, as well as identify the new potential and open up the doors for the new potential, for the youth, to have the opportunity of demonstrating this capacity within the Democratic Party and giving this contribution within the Democratic Party, which is and remains, even under the conditions of the electoral defeat of June 23, the house of freedom of all Albanians. Sali Berisha is the historical leader of this party, from the founding moment up to his decision to resign and take the responsibility for June 23 elections, which we all know he can only claim for the part that belongs to him, but the responsibility was never personal. The party has undergone an election process. I've been elected with more than 80% of the vote of more than 42,000, which, by the way, 42,000 people showed up and voted, which, by the way, I read somewhere was the same number of members that our sister party in Poland has. So just to show you the massivity, the scale in which Democrats chose to participate in this process. But Mr. Berisha continues to be an extremely valuable asset in the opposition fight, with his vast experience and with his reputation within the Democratic Party, outside of the Democratic Party, within Albania, within the Albanian nations, and internationally.
Because I'm often asked this in Washington, who controls the Democratic Party? Is it the new leader or is it the old leader?
I think controlling the party is probably an overhaul term. We're trying to, as much as possible, let the Democratic Party be controlled by its sovereign, which is Democrats. And that is one of the aims of the process that we have just launched, for the membership of the party to find itself as much as possible involved and at the wheel of important decision makings, from functional to political elections.
Right. But you are the final decision maker.
I am the final decision maker. I am the chairman of the Democratic Party. I have all the attributes and the responsibility to lead the Democratic Party.
When is the convention, by the way, scheduled for? Party convention?
We have just kicked off the process. We are aiming to finalize analysis and the process of reflection and analysis, as well as the local party elections within the coming 2 months, with the aim of finalizing the entire process, including the convention, within the month of February. But what is important is the way it is done, and not the speed with which it is done.
Are there likely to be changes in program of the party, given your poor showing in the elections?
What we believe is that election result must be used to reflect on so many issues, but we do not believe that Albanians voted against the positive things that we achieved through our program, on basis of which are freedom of the individual to create in a society, responsibility of the government, but not a state-run society, and of course our core values as far as domestic and international issues are concerned, which, as I said, were responsible for a streak of positive achievements over the years that we governed. So we have no reason to review the fundamentals of the values and the principles with which we were created 23 years ago, and on basis of which we have operated many successes in government as well as in opposition. What we have to do, for sure, is to deeply reflect on the message of the voters, especially as communication with citizens, learning how to listen to their voice, learning to read their criticism, not discarding analysis of mismanagement of power at various levels, and coming out of it with a rational and forward-looking conclusions that will be embraced not simply by the Albanian Democratic Party membership, but by the society as a whole. This is a precondition before we launch our second campaign, which is a campaign to join the forces with the majority of Albanians once again.
Let me ask you, in conclusion, very briefly, to put on your other hat, at least for a couple of minutes, as mayor of Tirana. You've been mayor for over 2 years, almost 2.5 years now. Where do things stand in terms of your objectives, in terms of your campaign pledges, in terms of redevelopment of Tirana, in terms of, particularly I'm interested in the budget question. I mean, every government is restrained by budget, whatever plans they have. How much have you managed to achieve? What do you still hope to achieve during your term in office?
Well, it's a good time to reflect. It's the end of the year, and soon we're going to do this formally as well. But you know, when I look at the results of this year combined with those of last year, which are the 2 full years of my administration, not excluding the 4 months of 2011, and I look at the promises, I think we've covered a lot of mileage here. Tirana has an urban plan, which it hasn't had for 23 years. I promised it, I delivered, it's now at work. The quality of life in the city has improved as a result of robust interventions, small, medium and large, in public infrastructure, from water and sewage to the quality of roads and pavements, to increasing the amount of trees and also green space in the city, to addressing the issue of the quality of kindergartens and creches and schools. We have been able to implement, for the first time in Albania, and I think wider maybe in the region, an economic policy from a local government perspective. We have lowered taxes, eliminated tariffs. We have put into operation a fund of guarantees, which for the first time allows Tirana young entrepreneurs under the age of 35 to navigate more easily towards getting a loan up to $50,000. And last week I signed the guarantees for the first 6 loans, which is not simply a novelty in local government, but it is also highly needed oxygen for the city's economy, but also a gesture of hope and inspiration for youth to engage in the conditions of free market economy in entrepreneurial activity, thus creating more jobs, creating more income, more welfare, most importantly creating more hope. Keeping the city optimistic on its economy and on its future is very important. I would say we've made very good progress with our strategic projects. Just behind you here, the new boulevard is not anymore a plan or a design. The design is finished. Grimshaw Architects of London has done a great job. Our partners with the Abu Dhabi Development Fund and the Kuwait Development Fund, as well as the State of Qatar, are helping with the funds. Renowned companies are now, after having internationally procured the 2 bits, the boulevard and the river, are busy at work. And this strategic project will give Tirana a lacking dimension. Imagine the main axis will be doubled in the direction of the north, and it will meet there the river of Tirana, 6 to 10 times bigger than the Lana river, which will then be rehabilitated and create a blue and green corridor, adding to the green space, recreational space, adding more development opportunities, but also recreational opportunities, space for museums, for other public activities, adding jobs in the process, and adding the perspective for jobs later. The new train station, because the old one now has been relocated, is part of another project that we have launched with EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And they are now in the process of launching the tender. It will be a full concession, so it will cost no public money to the city of Tirana, which means an investor will come in, more jobs will be created in implementing this project, and at the end of the project, a modern multimodal terminal will be there, where the train will come. In the future, a tram line will start to go into the heart of the city. All interurban buses will stop, so there will be no interurban buses blocking the traffic in the roads. We are in the process with the World Bank, IFC, to finalize the terms and launch another concession for waste collection and disposal. The aim is that by next year, waste within the smaller city ring is deposited underground, and that this approach is followed throughout the city in the coming 5 years. So making sure that the city is even cleaner, but also in a more environmental friendly way. So there will be no garbage containers above the ground. And waste disposal will also be done in such a way that both the recycling as well as the very disposal process do not consume more land, creating more landfills, but create value for the community and for Albania as a whole.
But do you, very last question. Do you
so if I, in one nutshell, I think we've done very good progress in maintaining a clear course of action as far as economic policy and job creation in the city, improving the quality of life in the city through the investments everywhere, in every neighborhood. I wish I could have brought with me some of the pictures of how they were before and how they are now. And in prosecuting vigorously our vision for a modern and European Tirana through the strategic projects that are now not simply a vision, but a reality at work.
Very last question. Do you envisage any problems with the central government in terms of some of the reform plans you still have, the reconstruction plans in Tirana? Because on certain issues you have to cooperate with the central government.
Well, you know, there's no lack of will from the municipality of Tirana to cooperate, because primarily in our agenda are the interests of Tirana citizens, Democrats, socialists, non-affiliated. This is the point of view I have taken and I continue to take as mayor of Tirana. And I assure you that I will continue to do this on every matter that concerns the interests of the citizens of Tirana. As far as the other side is concerned, I can only wish or hope for.
Lulzim Basha, Mayor of Tirana, Leader of the Opposition, thank you very much for your time, for being on my show again. I'm sure we'll have you back again in the future. And we're going to break now for a few ads. My second commentary today on an important European topic concerns combating Balkan corruption. Fighting official corruption is one of the buzz phrases used by European Union representatives as a condition for EU membership, and it is often directed at Balkan countries. But can corruption be rooted out in systems where politics and business are so closely interconnected and where personal favors predominate? A recent Transparency International report indicates that such goals would be very difficult to attain. There are many levels of corruption. While some are commonplace during periods of systemic transition, others are more customary and deep-rooted. Government office provides an especially lucrative means for enrichment in awarding business contracts, especially where transparency, accountability, and oversight are absent. After its negative experiences with Bulgaria and Romania, the EU has raised the conditionality principle on combating official corruption among aspiring members. Before its entry into the Union, Croatia convicted a former Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister on corruption charges. Other countries may try to imitate Croatia, but skepticism remains widespread. Convicting a few selected individuals and former politicians does not represent a comprehensive anti-corruption drive. Experience also shows that many court cases collapse short of a criminal conviction, particularly where judges can be bribed or threatened. Citizens who confront pervasive graft on a daily basis remain highly skeptical of current government initiatives. They are convinced, rightly or wrongly, that all political parties and large businesses are fundamentally corrupt. Transparency International's Global Corruption Barometer reveals that the perception level of corruption among citizens is actually worsening in most Balkan countries. The judiciary, the health services, parliament, and political parties are perceived as the most corrupt political institutions. In conditions of pervasive pessimism and public cynicism, combating corruption will remain a long and hard struggle. If corruption is to be effectively reduced, then outraged citizens must become more engaged and organized in pushing their elected representatives into action. It is time now to involve our studio audience for a discussion about politics and world affairs. What is in the minds of Albanian citizens? And today we have students and staff from Crystal University. Hello everyone and welcome to the show. Let me get up and get closer to you so I can hear you. And I'd welcome your questions. Please, who's first?
Mr. Bugajski, my question is about, do you think that participation of Albanian people and the Democratic Party in the protest against the demolition of chemical weapons in Albania has affected in relations between Albania and the USA?
Very good question. I don't think it's going to affect relations negatively between Washington and Tirana, which is, I think, what you're asking. I think quite the opposite. There's lessons to be learned from this, from the whole process, how it was handled and mishandled. I would say, first of all, when you're dealing with a major question such as this, such as the dismantling of chemical agents, you have to, first of all, be very clear what it is you want the country to do. You need to be very transparent in terms of the whole process, how dangerous it is or how safe it is. Thirdly, you need to explain the record of that country in dismantling similar weapons in the past. In other words, the comparative advantage of that country, its location, its experience, and so forth in relation to other countries. And fourthly, I think you have to be absolutely honest with the public. And I think here the process was mishandled, not just by Tirana, but I think also by Washington. First of all, I would say that there wasn't a danger of chemical weapons suddenly exploding in Albania, which is the image that was created. These are chemical agents that can and have been dismantled in other cases, in many other cases. Secondly, I would say Albania was not necessarily chosen because it's a poor country and it needs the money, because we've approached other allies. We've approached France, we've approached Belgium, other countries, and it may actually end up being dismantled in the sea. So I think there's a lesson to be learned from that. The other side of it, I would argue, is that it helped to raise the profile of civil society. The spontaneous organization of citizens in Albania on a very important national issue was, I think, critical, was almost historic, I would say. And it wasn't partisan, it was open, it was spontaneous, it was through social networking, it was young people. So this is civil society at work, which is what we in America have been encouraging Albanians to do for years. So I don't think it can possibly harm relations between Albanian people and the United States. In fact, a lot of people in the US say, good for the Albanians. Eventually they said no. Because I think a country that occasionally says no, even to a close ally, is a true ally. And I know in the case of, for example, Polish relations with America, there are times when Poland said no, but it didn't become a lesser ally as a result. I would say it even became a more respected ally as a result. So to answer your question in brief, I think it may actually, paradoxically, improve American-Albanian relations. I don't think you should worry that the relations would deteriorate. Please, who has another question?
My question is about Albania and EU. If we can take a candidate status, what will change in Balkan? What will be our positions?
If you gain candidacy status?
Yes.
There's two sides to this question. If you gain, what will it change? And if you don't gain candidacy status, what will happen? I think if you gain candidate status, you will be on a level with most of your neighbors. In other words, in terms of progress on the ladder towards EU accession. And that's a very long ladder, remember. This does not mean membership. It means you've gone on to the next stage, where you seriously then begin to open the accession process. It will put you on the level, I would say, then with Serbia, with Macedonia, although it's blocked for other reasons, with Montenegro and so forth. So I think that's very important, because I do believe, even though it's based on merit, the progress into the European Union, we have to look at the situation in each country and compare it to neighbors. You cannot have a situation where one country seems to be discriminated against whereas its neighbors who may have a similar economic and political system with similar problems, i.e. corruption, rule of law, mismanagement, and so forth, and yet they're admitted to candidacy status and Albania isn't. So the flip side of the coin, I think it's actually more dangerous for Albania not to be given candidacy status, because then I think that could encourage greater political polarization in the country, greater social disquiet. Feelings have been discriminated against by the European Union vis-a-vis Serbia and other neighbors. So I think that would be a bad decision on the part of the European Union. But I do know that some countries in the European Union, some of the leadership of these countries, are still opposed to Albanian candidate status for various reasons. Some of it, I think, is discriminatory. Some of it, I think, is double standards. I personally hope that the decision is made on the recommendation of the Commission and the majority in the European Parliament, that the European Council does actually approve candidate status, because that will send a very positive signal at a time when Albania has gone through an important election, which it managed, I think, very well. This was a free and fair election. It was a smooth transfer of power. Both sides, both the Democrats and the Socialists, both the government and the opposition, are for this agreement. I think every Albanian wants to be a part of Europe, part of European Union eventually. So to deny that at this particular time, I think would be, if not a tragedy, it would be a mistake. And I think the repercussions could be longer term. That's how I would phrase it. Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have already come to the end of the show. I have, as usual, greatly enjoyed being with you and with all of my colleagues here at Albanian Screen. Good night, everyone. Stay healthy, be productive, and remain optimistic. See you all very soon. Miro Pavshim.